Hi everyone, today I thought that I would share with you the story of how and why I became a Catholic. Obviously this is a very personal topic and it's always a bit awkward to be vulnerable on the internet, especially when it's true stories about yourself and your life. And there is some pressure to properly represent the faith and trust that I endeavor to do that in the best way possible. I am not a theologian, I am just a layperson, and I ask for your patience in that respect. I also ask for your prayers in my journey with Christ, and I hope my story can be edifying to whoever is watching. Thank you. So I was raised in a very irreligious family to the point that I did not know what a Bible was or who Jesus was. I would almost describe it as atheistic. My mom and dad are very open-minded people, but they themselves do not hold to any belief system. My ancestors on both sides of my family are from the UK, and they were mostly members of the Church of England as far as I know. My grandparents on my dad's side were not overly religious people, and I don't remember them practicing. My grandmother on my mom's side became a very devout Jehovah's Witness. I can't speak for my mom, but I know that the negative experiences that she endured while in that group and that she later relayed to me left a lasting impression on my negative Christianity. That's not to blame her in any way, as there were many other factors, and I believe that her feelings are valid. I do remember that me and my brother used to bike in the parking lot of a local Protestant church because there were like a bunch of hills and it was a really good place to ride your bike. Obviously when there was no one there. I think that's what planted the idea in his head to ask my father one day if we could go to church. Of course, my dad is open-minded, so he said okay, even if he probably wasn't keen on it. He told us to get dressed in our best clothes because people who went to church dressed nicely. And of course, all of this was mystifying to us kids, and we were very curious to go. We didn't know what any of it meant. But suddenly my brother said that he did not want to go anymore, that he was nervous, and we ended up not going. But it just goes to show you how naive we were about faith, yet still curious as most children are by things we don't understand. We all have that innate pull towards understanding our purpose. As I grew older, almost all of my opinions regarding religion were completely dependent on secular culture. I had no introduction to any sort of Christian ethos or theology. I don't think I had a single friend who was an active Christian, and it was very much the norm to come from an irreligious family in my neighborhood. When people spoke negatively about the church, and I mean every denomination because I really did not know the difference, I was in no position to refute it. And I certainly wasn't going to open up a Bible, so I began to believe the rhetoric that what I was hearing was true. I believed the myth that Christians were the cause of all war, that the Bible was totally unreliable, that it oppressed women, that humanity was better off without any form of religion. Like many people, I bought into the idea that religion and science were incompatible, and it was best to leave that in the past. As a teenager, I grew up in a very strict household with my stepfather and my mom, and I was a hardcore introvert. Since I was young, I've always been a bit of an old lady, an old soul, my mom would say. I've never wanted to party or to go out. I didn't even go to my prom by choice, and I was okay with that. I also never dated. I was really sheltered, to put it mildly. When I graduated, the first job I got was in a car factory at age 17, and since I worked the midnight shift, we were often sent on odd jobs around the plant to catch up on work that had been missed by the day shift. And I was often assigned to this one machine which I worked with a man named Will. Will was the first openly religious person I'd ever met in my life. He carried a crucifix with him, which I thought was absolutely bonkers. Remember, I was a 17-year-old atheist who thought they knew everything. And so we often had long discussions throughout the night about various subjects, but mostly religion. He always had an answer for all of my questions and my rebuttals, which at the time infuriated me. I thought he was brainwashed, which is very funny in retrospect. Regardless, I left that time in my life thinking that I was still right, but perhaps subconsciously thinking about what Will had told me. When I went to university at age 18, it was a complete culture shock. Remember, at the time, I was a girl who had never drank alcohol, nor had gone out on a date with a man. Moreover, I had come from a small town where almost no one was religious. Now I was on a campus with thousands of other students in an unfamiliar city. There was a very large population of Muslim students as well, and I don't think I'd ever seen a hijab in my life, let alone a niqab. It's actually interesting to note that the university I'd chosen, mostly for its cheaper tuition, I'll be honest, was historically a seminary for priests and had a beautiful chapel and church on campus. I think it is actually one of the oldest churches in my province, if I'm not wrong, which I never took advantage of because I was not Catholic and I kind of cry thinking about it. But anyways, because of this new chapter in my life, I thought I'd reinvent myself and be a new kind of woman. I wanted to try partying and being social and doing all of these things that secular culture had told me would ultimately fulfill me. After all, I was 18 and that's the best time of your life, supposedly. But I think I was very ill-prepared for the reality that would hit me. I had become involved in a very unhealthy relationship, I had friends fall off, I was isolated from my family, and I was increasingly involved in what I would personally characterize as demonic activity. I even worked for a new age store for a time before I was fired. That is the only time I have ever been fired in my life, and it was because I was supposedly, according to the store owner who claims to be clairvoyant, possessed. Yes. Maybe I should make a story time video about my experiences there because it's kind of wild. But in reality, I had dodged a bullet. I was also dealing with, unbeknownst to me at the time, a chronic illness and depression. Plus, I was slowly realizing that I wasn't happy in post-secondary school and the things that were supposed to be fulfilling me were not. I hated drinking, I hated partying, I didn't want to be promiscuous. Some of my female friends even became involved in the sex industry because that was supposedly the best way to get a lot of money fast. And it was actively encouraged even at this point in culture, which was already 7 or 8 years ago, and it was not nearly as prevalent. Sorry. I remember all of these feelings and emotions culminating in me, and I, for some reason, well, I know the reason, went onto Amazon and bought a Bible. I still remember what it looked like. It was a King James Version Bible with a faux leather cover, and it was pink, probably what you would buy for your cousin at their confirmation ceremony.
Dapatkan promo terbaik. Unduh app Agoda sekarang.
Minum Entrasol 2 kali sehari.
Entrasol.
And I remember sitting in my chair and opening the Bible to a random page. Remember, I had never read a Bible in my life. And I think it was probably Leviticus that I opened it to, and I was so overwhelmed and horrified by what I read that I immediately shut it and put the ideas of God out of my mind. It's interesting to consider that in retrospect, in my darkest hours, I was already reaching out to God. The door was already opened in a way, but I was not ready to take that first step. It also goes to show how important it is to know scripture and how to read it. Or else you'll have situations like that where I did not know what the context was and used it to reinforce the biases that I already held. Either way, I ended up leaving school and I came back to my hometown with, no exaggeration, probably $20 to my name. I had worked so hard and paid my tuition with my money and I had nothing to show for it, and I felt defeated. I didn't know what direction my life was going in. And I was living in my mom's friend's basement who graciously opened her home to me. But I just felt lost, I guess. My next door neighbor happened to be the secretary of the school that I went to as a young child, and she recognized my last name. She asked if I was a Christian and if I would like to go to church with her. I was obviously taken aback and, reverting to my old ways, laughed a bit and brushed her off. But I think at that time a seed was planted. I felt bad because I knew that I had upset her, and I thought more about going to church after that day. Because no one had openly asked me to go to church with them ever, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. Eventually, I did take her up on her offer, and I went to a local church. This was an Anglican church, it was not Catholic, but at that time I didn't even know the difference. And when I walked into that church, one of the first people I saw was Will and his wife, the people who had first spoken to me about God all of those years ago. It was as if God was saying, this is where you need to be. This is where I was leading you. You're searching for a path, here it is. I started attending said church and learned about who Jesus was. I want to emphasize that although I did not stay as an Anglican, this was the church that warmly welcomed me and worshipped with me. It was where I first heard the gospel. Being very Canadian, I met with the priest of the parish at the local Tim Hortons to discuss the faith and whether I might be interested in becoming baptized. Of course, I brought a laundry list of conditions that I felt that God had to conform to if I were to follow him. I'm not exaggerating, I had terms and conditions. I was very young in the faith and extremely naive. I didn't yet know the transformative power of the gospel and what it meant to pick up the cross and follow him. Like many people nowadays, I thought my own feelings and wants were central to the universe and my experiences therein. I guess my conversion story is a bit different because there were no light bulb moments like so many people have. Lots of converts that I talk to have had miraculous things happen in their life, or perhaps have a moment of great clarity. But for me, my whole journey has been one lesson in submission. God had to break down the walls and barriers that I'd been building for so long so that I could hear his words and understand the mission of his son. I'm actually very fortunate in the sense that I was not raised in one faith because I really had a blank slate. I didn't feel obligated to research one Christian tradition because of familial pressure. I had the freedom to explore anything. As mentioned, I went to school in an extremely multicultural area. There were mosques, Buddhist temples, Hindu temples, every Christian denomination you can think of. I also have the internet, so there was really no excuse to just settle for what I believed might be true. Although I was a reluctant Christian, I knew in my heart that Jesus was the truth. I just had to explore that truth and where his church was. I was eventually baptized on November 25th, 2018 on the feast day of Christ the King. Will and his wife were my sponsors, and they continue to be great mentors to me to this day, which I am very thankful for. It's interesting to note that one of the biggest elements of my journey in faith coincided with this day, which is meant to proclaim Christ's sovereignty over individuals, families, society, governments, nations. God knows. But that discomfort that I initially experienced when attending church grew into full-blown doubt the longer I stayed where I was. Again, this is not meant to insult anyone who may be Anglican, as I know there are many traditional Anglicans out there. Calvin Robinson comes to mind. But I was discouraged by so many of the changes being made within the church. I felt that it was caving to many secular dogmas, which were contrary to what I saw in scripture as I studied more. And so, while remaining Christian, I did a lot of searching, and I mean a lot. I attended everything from Pentecostal, conservative Mennonite, non-denominational, Lutheran, etc. I also tried to grow in my knowledge of scripture and prayer during this time. And what I realized that I was craving was tradition. I wanted to find the church that Jesus describes in Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it. I began to read a lot of beautiful works by the saints and church fathers, and I was really attracted to the stories of the saints. These people who were once alive as we are now, most of whom were flawed and struggled like us, but now act as beacons of piety and what we can strive to be. And all for different reasons. They all had different backgrounds, men and women. I loved the idea that they could advocate on our behalf. Weirdly enough, as a child with no knowledge of God, I came to know the saints through stories of heroism in other settings like history class, but in a strictly secular way. For example, Saint Joan of Arc. I was fascinated by her. And although her Catholicism is often misappropriated, shall we say, in secular culture, her death stuck with me. I also began to research different devotions. There was a rosary in the Anglican Church, and I was always really attracted to it. So I began to pray the Catholic Rosary. That was definitely a game changer in my faith because as soon as I prayed the rosary, That was definitely a game changer in my faith because as soon as I prayed the rosary, I could not live without it. And despite the often rampant misinformation, anti-Catholic rhetoric that I found on the internet, there were so many great apologists that I found on Reddit, YouTube, Instagram. I had questions like many people do about the Blessed Mother as well as the papacy, which are of course highly debated. My favorites being Trent Horn, Scott Hahn, Matt Fradd, the religious hippie, that black Catholic chick, and of course classics like Chesterton and Bishop Fulton Sheen, etc. Social media can often be a poison, but in this instance it was so helpful because I really had no Catholics in my immediate friend group or family who could be a positive witness to the faith. And those who I knew were Catholic didn't really take it seriously. They didn't go to Mass anymore or didn't hold to the tenets of the church. There was also the liturgy that really blew me away. I loved the reverence when I first went to Mass. The people crossing themselves and kneeling, receiving the Eucharist. I know that joyful worship has a time and a place, but I like that it didn't feel as if it was attending a charismatic Christian rock concert. I wanted to be part of the Mass. And how wonderful it is that we have a God who actively participates in this beautiful sacrifice in his true presence in the Eucharist. I believe Bishop Barron describes Catholicism as the fullness of the Christian faith, and I really agree with that. I think it's a great way to put it. Obviously, I could go on forever and ever, but eventually I was formally welcomed into the church in 2021 by the grace and goodness of God. I wish I could say that everything went swimmingly from there as a Catholic, but as we know, the church is part of our journey in faith as our home, but we continuously walk with Christ, and we are fallible. I have fallen off the wagon, as it were. I have dealt with seasons of doubt, I think partially because I'm still young in the faith, but also from not having a solid Catholic community around me in my personal sphere to keep me accountable when life happened. And I'm not saying that to put blame on others, but fellowship is so important, and I think we all know that. And when we have bad experiences, sometimes we need someone there to help us work through it. I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder as an adult. It helped to put a lot of words to what I had sometimes been experiencing and the wild range of emotions that I could feel. Not many people understand this, but those with BPD often deal with intense highs and lows. And on the outside, it might seem like these people don't have a stable identity. Therefore, my faith would oscillate between extreme scruples and crushing doubt. There would be times where I felt that I could never be a Catholic and other times where I was super involved in my faith. Sometimes we have a tendency to share a polished version of our testimony rather than the reality that comes with being human. Sometimes we struggle, and that is natural. We are sinners. But I'm so grateful for Jesus and the church he has established, which has shown me great mercy. I am so grateful for the sacraments, particularly confession, which has guided me when I am at my lowest in the faith. I am also thankful for the priests who have to shepherd their flocks. They need our prayers. Pray for your local priest. I now actually work for a Catholic organization, which is so incredible as I get to live out my faith every day. I think God provides us with what we need, even if we don't understand or value these gifts at the time. I definitely needed stability and a community, and I found it in that. And I hope to also create it for other converts on my YouTube channel. So that's where I'm going to leave it for today. This is just a very short, quick version of my testimony. I could go on for hours, but yeah, I think I'll leave it for today. I really appreciate you watching. I hope my story was encouraging to you in your faith, whether you are Catholic, born and raised, or just questioning. Feel free to comment or email me if you have any questions at all, or if you would like to share your own experiences. Please keep in mind that I always encourage discussion, but be civil. Thank you all so much for watching. Subscribe for more Catholic content. Remember that a like and share go a long way, and have a great day. Bye!